reverse to that. And that'll be a moist poultice, okay? So we do get a little bit of body work demonstration this weekend. Okay? And of course, there are many different types of body work that you can do for vata conditions. But we're just going to look at some of the few ones that we're going to demonstrate that you probably haven't seen before. Okay? So that's going to be our schedule for today. Tomorrow it may alter a little bit again. For today. Okay?
Yep.
Sounds good?
Yep.
Okay.
Can I get my friend?
Send it this way.
Mike's gonna sell it.
Oh.
They pretty please.
Hi.
Good morning.
We just went over,
So
some changes in the schedule.
you guys play around with the fans as you need them. If you need another fan in here, let us know. Just move them around. I know some don't want them right on them and others do. And
They can go on. Yes, that's fine.
yeah, I'll just circulate.
Just
I just have a certain number of plugs that make it.
Okay.
Sure, it's not.
Do we have time for a little question about something
Sure.
that came up yesterday?
Sure.
Gina. So when Gina was sharing about her move from the dry southern part of California
Yeah.
to New England, I was thinking, oh, good, it's cooler here. So I wouldn't have seen that water, the moisture thing coming. I get that it's the pitta. Would it be because she also has kapha in the constitution that would like signal that to me? Okay.
The difference in when we look at regions where a person is located, in a mountainous region, for the most part, and especially this area, or the New England area, for the most part, it tends to be somewhat moist and cool. And otherwise, this, as well as areas like Seattle, where it's also moist and cool, but it's more moisture than this moisture. These all tend to aggravate more of kapha in a person who naturally has kapha. They're more prone to it. And for them, a more suited climate, or where they naturally don't necessarily see as much of their natural symptoms, is when they are in a drier climate. So in the Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, those are areas that are more dry. And that's sort of the kind of like desert-like conditions. So it's dry and hot. And it's opposite to the qualities that you typically find here. Here we do have the variation of seasons, but even in the variation of season, it never gets to the point where it's completely dry. There's always some amount of moisture here compared to there. So the reason why she may not have seen as many of these symptoms, or may not have had that manifestation of these conditions that she had with her hands and this reaction to the sour substances, is because she always had the dry climate that helped to negate that. Remember, in our timeline, we had these three things that came in that either contribute to the Bhoga Bala or the Yogi Bala. The dry climate was one of the factors that helped her, that helped to regress the any change or any production of disease. It worked in her favor. But being here, the climate here actually feeds into the Roga Bala, because it is the similar qualities of the Roga itself. That's why here the Roga gets more strength so it can manifest. There, the climate factor worked in her favor, so therefore it didn't manifest. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason why you find these differences even in people. They say, or like they say, they go on vacation, and all of a sudden they're perfectly fine when they're on vacation. Oh, I love, some people say I go to the Caribbean and I love it. Other people say I go to the Caribbean and I was miserable because it doesn't work. It either works in their favor or works against them. Okay? So that's one way of how this can. So this is the reason why she didn't necessarily have that. And that they've described Anupa, Jangala, and Sadharana Desha. The three different types of deshas, or different types of regions. So Anupa is the place where it's very, very moist or completely moist, always raining like Seattle is the Anupa Desha. Jangala is where it's more mountainous and more, Jangala means basically forested area. So that's more like this region. And Sadharana is where it tends to be more dry. It's more somewhat in the middle of these two, but more on the dry side. Okay, so depending on the desha where the person is located, you have that factor. So that's, remember in the Dashavida Pariksha they asked desha is one of them. It's the deha desha and also the external desha. So when you ask about that, you ask about where in the body this thing is manifesting, as well as where that person is located. In Dashavida Pariksha, we need to look at both things. So not just the actual location in the body, desha means where the location in the body, as well as where the person is actually located. Okay, so we take into consideration both of them. Okay. And there was one more question where we were looking at, someone asked about wound healing. I just wanted to put this up here for you. Oh yeah, we need some of that. Now I know we usually don't do this of giving you like a fixed prescription, but this is an external, typically what we use, a very common wound healing combination, it's a medicated heat that we use, that you use externally. Okay, so Jatyadi, or okay. Jatyadi is a combination. You can get it in two forms. You can get it as a pita or Taila. The ingredients they use to make this, it's the same, just the base maybe either in a ghee form or the base maybe in an oil form. The purpose of this is typically for wound healing. So it's sort of open wounds, post-surgical. This is where we use this. We use this for post-surgical conditions where we're trying to induce healing. Okay, and this is available. You can get this from Kotico. You can get it from some other usually traditional Ayurvedic pharmacies make this, and some of them are available here in the US. So you can order this. And typically, again, applied externally. You have to just keep in mind that there shouldn't be any dead tissue there. If there is dead tissue, that needs to be removed. And then this should be applied to that.
Does it look kind of greenish?
Yes, it does look greenish. And the reason why is because the main ingredient in this is amla. It's amla, etc. But the majority portion of the ingredients in this is amla. That's the reason why it is greenish.
I have a tube of this and I had no idea what it was. That's why I'm smiling, because I'm like, oh, that's what it's for. I put it on the poison ivy the other day and it didn't work. It made it worse.
Yeah, because if there is itching, if there is already moisture and it's not an open wound, it will not work for patches or for eruptions or swellings. It works specifically for open wounds. So there has to be a break in the skin. If there's a break in the skin, this helps too. What this does is this helps to remove the dead tissue that is there internally, and it initiates more proliferation of healthy new cells. So that's why it's used for wound healing, not used for, you think, okay, well, it's good for wound healing, it's good for skin, so it can be done for everything. No, it doesn't work for that particular condition. So there needs to be a break in the skin. That's the criteria. There's a break in the skin and the continuity of the tissue. That's when this is used. So this will help too, for it to heal and for it to come back together, produce new tissue, new connective tissue. Okay. So this is one of we were just talking about this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Okay. So just to finish up, one last point in sleep, the topic of sleep that we were talking Charaka describes where you can advise, or in certain conditions where you can have sleep during the day. Okay? So in that he says, there are certain times when a person can sleep, for instance, if they are exhausted by the following activities. If you feel exhausted by singing, singing too much, you can take a nap. You can sleep. If you're studying excessively, which is one thing we were so happy when we read this as students, because then we would all take naps and like, well, check this out. If a person has had alcoholic drinks, so hangover, yeah, you kind of want to sleep. Exhausted by sexual acts. Exhausted by see, it's their environment that was just leading up to our actual conversation. So exhausted from shodhana therapy, from any type of shodhana. And notice here, when they talk about shodhana, they say shodhana and they don't use the term panchakarma. The reason why panchakarma just describes 5 therapies, but it's not necessarily only those 5 that you can use for shodhana, for cleansing the body. Okay? So it's not panchakarma here, but it's any type of shodhana, any type of cleansing of the body. If it's done excessively or you're exhausted from the process of this cleansing, then in those situations also, it's okay. Okay? If you're exhausted from carrying heavy weights, so moving. If you're exhausted from walking long distances. And from those who are suffering from conditions such as wasting or depletion. Thirst, so another example again, summer season. Diarrhea or colic pain. If they have breathing issues in certain conditions. If it is a breathing issue due to vata alone, then yes, the person can sleep. If they're feeling sleepy, then absolutely. And even in certain situations of psychological disorders, they can sleep. Not all, and we will describe that in a minute, which conditions, which psychological disorders it's okay to sleep, and which psychological disorders you should not sleep. Okay? Also, in a person who is elderly, it's okay for them to sleep. If they're feeling sleepy, then it's good. Let them sleep. Similarly, in infants or children. So remember I was telling you yesterday, Saturda describes every situation. He doesn't leave out details. So he's describing even the normal situations where someone will sleep during the day. Okay? If someone is exhausted from a journey, traveling. So after you travel, it's okay to sleep. Or staying awake at night, which we talked about yesterday of people who work in the night shift. If someone is suffering from anger, grief, and fear, and the reason why is because in the state of sleep, you're able to somewhat detach yourself from the stimulus for that anger, grief, or fear. Okay? Usually the stimulus for those tend to be external. Ever notice that if you're tracing where the source of those emotions are coming from, they're not really coming from inside. Those emotions tend to be triggered, but the source is actually from the outside. So by sleeping, you're detaching yourself from the source of those emotions. So that's why you help to negate the production of that reaction. Your emotions are a reaction to that external source. Yes? Mm-hmm. So by sleeping during the daytime in these situations, what this does is this helps to create a balance and maintain the balance of the doshas and the dhatus. And it also helps to give the person strength. Okay? And it does in some way increase a little bit of kapha, not excessively, a little bit, so much so that it can help to provide, again, nourishment. Because remember what we were describing yesterday, is that sleep is one factor to help the body to be nourished, right? So it's one source of nourishment. This is the reason why, again, if somebody's depleted, if they are in any one of these disease situations where the disease is causing depletion, then sleep becomes a source of nutrition, because sleep becomes a source of allowing their body to calm down and to be nourished again. Just by that slight increase of kapha that happens, it will then provide some amount of nourishment. Okay? Again, in the summer season, that's typically when you have to, you can sleep during the daytime. And the reason why is because the nights tend to be shorter. And this is what we know, right? 5 o'clock this morning, it was pretty bright outside. So in the summertime, because the nights are shorter, that's also another reason why you can sleep during the summertime. Okay. Okie dokie. So that's all there is about sleep. So the next one is the mind. Next topic is the mind, and that's a big one. And the reason I'm describing these topics for you is because first I'm giving you all the normal presentation. What are the factors that play into these vata conditions? And we term it as vata vyadis, but it's not just vata alone. It's all of the other factors that influence the balance or the change or the fluctuation of vata. Okay, so now we can see sleep is a very important factor in that. And the mind, again, is an extremely important factor. The mind not only in sleep, but also the mind for its own functions, as well as the mind in the extreme close relationship with vata. Okay? So what is the mind? The mind, as we described earlier, is the factor that puts us in contact. It has the ability to translate between the physical body as well as the subtle body. Okay? It's sort of the doorway, you can say. It's the doorway between the physical and the metaphysical. Okay? It carries out various functions, and it also helps in existence of the physical body. And the reason why we say it helps in existence, because again, since it is the doorway between the subtle and the physical body, if you look at it, this part here is the physical body. This can't exist without this part, right? So I know this kind of gets into philosophy a little bit, but if we look at it, in the actual production of the human body, right? You need these factors to come together first, and this is the evolution of how a person comes into being. So you need to have all these factors first before it can manifest here. And when they describe about reincarnation, what happens is this whole factor right here is what travels from one body to the next one. This physical body here is what gets left behind. And the way this happens, even that has been described in Saturda. He says that prana, the prana that we breathe, the prana that we have. Remember we talked about even in the last module that there's prana in you, there's prana in food, there's prana in everyone, prana all around. So that prana, actually, if we look at it, the prana is one and the same. There isn't different pranas. It's not your prana and my prana and the prana in food. It's actually one prana. So when the person dies, what's dying is this part here. So this part here, the prana leaves this part. But what goes along with this, what's leaving, is this aspect. So this travels with the prana from one body and enters into another body. And when it gets that, then it starts to manifest again, helping the manifestation of this. Okay? That's the sort of the discussion or the proof or the theory of how this exists, this reincarnation or this traveling from one body to the next can happen. It's also one of the reasons why, if you look at it as energy, if you know prana is an energy, it's also the reason why we can feel. If you are in tune, or if you are paying attention to your prana, you are paying attention to the prana around you. It's the same thing of why people can feel other people's energy. Mm-hmm. Because there is no difference between yours and theirs. Mm-hmm. What you're basically doing is paying attention to the variation of that prana. It's also the reason why the more attuned you become with realizing or learning about prana, why you can also read somebody's mind. There are certain people who can read other people's mind. And why can they do that? Is because of the fact that the prana, again, is one and the same. Your prana and that prana, the prana that is circulating, right? Isn't it prana that's moving and circulating? So you can understand or perceive the variation of this prana that is either coming from that person or that is coming from you. Because it's actually one and the same prana. Okay?
You said you including the mind in that?
Because the thing with the mind is, the mind again is the doorway. The mind is the doorway between these. And if you look at it, it is the instrument. Because another thing that is described in Saturda is the mind does not have consciousness. The mind is a dead instrument. The only reason it looks like it has consciousness is because of its connection or its adherence with this. This is actual consciousness. So in order for this to work, it needs to have the connection with these. And depending on the different functions of the mind, we can actually see the ahankara in the mind, and we can understand the buddhi in the mind, or we can understand all of this factor, the prakriti and the causal body, consciousness through the mind. So it is the instrument for all of this. Okay? So if this isn't present, the mind has no function. But if this is present with the mind, through the mind, we're able to understand. So it is the major tool, the instrument that you're using to actually understand all of this.
And because Bhakta always moves, we have to keep that mind, that doorway always open. And that's the nature of it, is that it is open and moving.
Right. So in the way, the reason why they use the word prana instead of using the word mind is because the mind has various functions. So if they use the word mind here in describing how it's moving in and out, it wouldn't give the correct sense. But they use the word prana because prana is the one that is moving in and out. So, but if you look at it, they both are in complete relation to each other. So even that prana, the way it's moving, that energy, the way it's moving, the understanding of that is done with the mind. Okay? So this is to look at how even that exchange of energy, that how we can perceive that. We all have the ability to perceive it because, again, your prana and my prana and all of this prana that we have around us isn't really different. It's all one. But it's are we paying attention to what's happening? It's the same thing like how we were talking about the mind being present with the sensory organs for us to perceive. Similarly, it's the mind being present and looking or paying attention to what's happening with the prana. If we develop that ability to pay attention to that, then we will perceive it. If we do not pay attention to it or focus it on that, then we won't perceive it. But we all have the ability to do that because the mind is there, the prana is the same. Okay? Yeah.
So when you're like with people, we're talking with people, and they're telling you one thing, but you're picking up on something else.
Yeah.
The mind, not mind.
Yeah.
Understand what their mind is saying. They might be like saying something to you, but you're like, "I don't know what they're saying. Why don't you just really spit out what you're saying? Because I'm sensing. Maybe it's Moss's mind. Is this where we're going to get into Rajas, Thomas, and
Exactly.
Sattvic in the mind where people are like, hi, how are you? On the other hand, you're reading, wow, yeah, you're trying to learn something out of me. And you can't say this to them, like, hey, this is, you're wrong. This is what you speak, what your truth is, because this is what I'm hearing from you.
Exactly.
And I'm hearing their mind, but the words are speaking
Exactly.
something else.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what I was telling you the last time when we were saying it. Everyone's like, well, sometimes we don't want to say our clients are lying. But sometimes the reason why you get that immediate reaction that something isn't right is because you in this line, we naturally pick up these qualities. We naturally start to pick up these skills of being able to understand what truth is and what isn't that. Okay? And so it's the same thing. If they're telling you something or they're pushing out something, but you're picking up on what's actually there,
Right.
is that even in that process, this is also the reason, because this prana is the same, it's also the reason people who are very attuned to that or who have created that skill and perception, why they can read pulse and tell you everything from that. Now again, the reason I don't really stress on pulse reading is because I don't have that skill. And I've met a few, but I haven't met many people who do have that skill. We all can develop the skill, but this is what they're doing. It's because again, even in that is an extension of prana. Remember when we were talking about the vatas and the different types of vatas, and we're going to talk about that even more. They're all basically extensions of each other, right? So even in that prana as well, it's moving, that one is moving. You're testing or you're perceiving through touch that movement. And by understanding or by really fine-tuning that skill, you're able to tell by that movement what is happening inside the person's body.
So if you can't tell, really get by, because I'm not really that
No,
good at
you
it.
can't, but there are other skills that you can use.
Saying, oh, yeah, we're just saying nothing pulse, but you can use your other senses to kind of bring it out so they can really get to what they really want to say and stuff like that.
Right. And as a clinician, there is so much of information you're going to be gaining from your clients, much more than what they just tell you. This is also, again, the reason why I stress it's better to fill out the questionnaire with the person than let them fill it out beforehand. The reason why is because when you ask those questions, the way they respond to the question, again, gives you some added amount of information. If they are thinking it over and filling it out on their own, sitting at their desk or before they come in or sitting in the waiting room, they're going to fill out as fast as they can or skip the things that they don't really like. It's the same thing what happens when people fill out their Prakriti charts. They're like, oh, well, this one looks nice. I think I'm bad. Yeah, I think I'm bad. And it's very skewed. It's the same thing. They don't understand what we're looking for. We know what we're looking for. We have gone through all these tons of lists and tons of signs and symptoms because we know what we're looking for. If you have them fill it out, they don't know what you're looking for. So they're going to answer whatever they think is applicable. It's the same thing with the question of the hemorrhoids. People may have it. They will not volunteer that information in the case sheet if you have them fill it out. Because they don't want to put that in there. Nobody wants to admit that they have hemorrhoids. But when you talk to them, when you get to the process of asking these questions, in the conversation, sometimes towards the end of the conversation, oh, by the way, I have hemorrhoids.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why it's better for you to ask them the question, for you to get that information than to let them fill it out.
This also makes me think that this is nuanced by when you're speaking to someone and you know they're not being truthful or lying, but then you have to figure out, are they aware of it? Are they believe what they're telling you, or are they absolutely unconsciously telling you some lie that they're not aware of and believe that they're telling the truth?
Yeah.
That's part of what we have to discern in the moment,
Right.
which are two somewhat grossly different things depending upon where it's coming.
That typically happens because sometimes what I realized, like just a couple of months ago, we were doing an internship and they had sent out the case sheet or the format to everyone beforehand. So everyone filled it out beforehand. And so I was sitting there with these filled out sheets and trying to ask the same questions again. but they had already filled it out. So the problem is that what they had filled out was not matching with what I was seeing. And so sometimes, not all the cases, but in some cases there were people who wanted to put in what they wanted to put in, and they conveniently left out things that they didn't want, or they didn't think was important. Or one person came in and she filled out just, very superficially. She's like, well, I have all these other conditions, but I don't expect you to really address that, so I didn't put it in there. But that's important for us to know, because any condition is indicative of what is happening internally. So yes, exactly what you said. There are certain things. You do develop an intuitive skill in this process of learning all of this. So like you said yesterday, whether you're learning it and being able to spit it out when somebody asks you a question, or just being able to even recognize it. That recognition itself indicates that you have understood some of it and that you are picking it up. So even when you go back now and after this module, after each and every module, you're going to start to see that the more you see clients, the more clarity you're getting about what's happening. You may even start to be able to visualize what's happening with their doshas, how the doshas are moving in their body, where it may be stuck, or how it has developed this process. So this is also one of the reasons of learning all of these different 1,000,001 signs and symptoms. It's because it's fine-tuning your intuitive skills to be able to pick up on what people are saying. So that's why it's much better to just ask them the question. Sometimes, like you said, some people just want to go on that rant and they want to tell their story and not do the questionnaire. Let them do the rant. Because even in that, you can pick and you can take what you need. And even in how they describe it, you will end up getting that information.
It also brings up to me who, when you know they're not quite being truthful, who you can nudge into the truth and who you can't.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely.
So you said 2 cups of coffee or 2 wines, it's really 3 or 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
No. Or, oh yeah. I find, for the most part, everybody lies about coffee.
I think you're gonna be judged.
Yeah, no,
And that's why I
absolutely.
say no judgment.
Yeah.
That's what it is. They're judging themselves. That's why they do it.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I can-
And that's the reason why, if you let them do it beforehand, they will put in conveniently what they think is okay, and that someone will not pass that judgment, as opposed to when you have that face-to-face interaction, sometimes they're forced to tell the truth, or even if they don't tell the truth, it shows on their face that they're not telling the truth. So that's why it's good to have that interaction. So,
And I sometimes say to clients, because it's been my own personal experience a few years back when I came to the point in my life that I realized I had nothing to lose and everything to gain by throwing it out there with whatever kind of a therapist and being absolutely real and genuine at the moment. And all of a sudden, the trajectory of healing changes. And any doctor, physician, therapist, whatever was working, they don't care. You know, you tell them something you're shameful of or whatever, they don't care. It's all fodder for healing.
right.
You know, so I sometimes throw that out to people. I tell my own story.
Mhm.
You know, and it's just about just throw it out there. Be truthful as you can.
Yeah, and that really helps. So sometimes, like you said, it is better to just have the conversation instead of having the sheet. It really depends on the person and what they want to get out of that session. But in the process, you're going to pick up. So this is the reason why even in the description of the mind, they don't have any exact set course, because the mind itself moves in so many ways. It moves in all sorts of directions. It moves in all different sorts of rhythms, all different sorts of areas. So even in the process of how someone speaks and what they're telling you, that also indicates what's happening with their mind. So though you may not be asking them a question about, oh, what is your mental state? By the way they speak, you're able to understand or get that impression of where their mind is at. And you will start to see the difference also from the first time you talk to them, or even from the first minute you start talking to them to the end of 1 hour, and how they speak at the end of an hour. And that transition tends to happen as well. That in the beginning, a little bit anxious, a little bit fidgety, doesn't really want to volunteer the information. And within that hour, in that process of talking, you develop a trust or you develop a relationship. So by the end of the hour, that's when they're ready to volunteer all the information. And that's when you actually get a chance to start picking up your boxes. Okay? So this process needs to be somewhat organic. It's better to let it go. You have your case sheets. Sometimes you need to just let it go, let it be organic, and then pick out and fill it out. But the amount of information you gain in that process is much more than letting them fill it out beforehand. There's so much more, so much other nuances that you gain than if you let them fill it out. And then what you're doing is you're limiting yourself to what they have written, as opposed to what you know and what you're trying to get, or trying to get that information. Okay? Okay. So looking at the mind, there are various roles of the mind that we're looking at. The mind has roles in the physical body, the mental aspect, as well as the spiritual realm. So in looking at the different bodies, or the different layers or levels, the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body. So that's why the physical, the mind, and spiritual. Okay? It has functions in all three of these levels. So how do we know that the mind exists? I know that seems like a silly question, but some people may ask this. How do we really know? So sometimes we understand a thing and sometimes we do not understand it. Okay? And this is one of the reasons why we can say that the mind does exist. How is it that sometimes, for instance, if I'm telling you something now as opposed to if I told you this exact same thing last night, you understand it now, you may not have understood it last night because maybe you were tired. So the fluctuation and that ability to understand or not understand, again, indicates that there is existence of the mind. If there was an existence of the mind, then that cognitive ability would not be there, or that ability to process information would not be there. It would always be constant. It means that if the mind was not there, then anytime anybody gives you any information, you would get it immediately. You would think, wouldn't that be ideal, or wouldn't that be great? You put a book in front of someone, they could read something on physics, and they got it. But it doesn't work that way. It varies and it changes. And indication of that fluctuation of the mind indicates that the mind does exist. Okay? So, in also looking at how we had described earlier. Yeah.
I might be jumping ahead, but talking of mind and cognitive. If a person is, say, brain dead or has Alzheimer's, or the mind's gone, does it come back? I mean, nobody knows for sure, right? But in philosophy, is the mind, does it come back? Is it restored? Is it new?
There's a possibility it can, and it all depends on what happened. What happened with the mind that this is manifested? And the funny thing you asked that question is because when I was doing research to write this thing on Alzheimer's, so we're going to talk about Alzheimer's probably tomorrow. When I was writing up the notes for that, what I realized is they're talking about loss of memory and loss of ability to recollect different things. However, in looking at the way the mind moves, is that necessarily a bad thing or a good thing? Because when you look at spirituality, what are you doing? You're doing the exact same thing. You're moving the mind away from certain memories, away from certain issues, and pointing it in a different direction. So it was funny that I was looking at a disease, but then realizing that there are certain conditions where this may not actually be a disease. This may be a body's natural reaction, or that person's consciousness trying to pull them back to their primal nature and trying to detach from the physical. Because if you look at philosophy and meditation, it's exactly the same process. So sometimes when a person diverts in that direction, it may seem like it's a pathology, but it may not necessarily be a pathology. It may be a person getting to that stage where they naturally should their body and their mind and their soul wants to detach. That's why it's moving in that direction. And even in that, if you're looking at it, you can understand the difference between the two by the other symptoms that are associated. Because the process that's happening in both these situations is exactly the same. If you're intentionally moving the mind out of that situation, or you're unintentionally moving the mind out of that situation. In Alzheimer's, you're unintentionally doing it. In meditation, you're intentionally doing it. But they're both exactly the same. So in that process, what are these signs and symptoms that are associated with them? Are you still feeling healthy, and are you still able to bring back yourself into that situation, or still be able to use the memories that are necessary? Or is it that you're losing those memories, but it's also associated with physical symptoms? When it starts getting associated with physical symptoms and gets to a point where it's dementia and delusion, your understanding, your cognition is skewed, then it means that your mind is working in this realm. Your mind is sort of circulating somewhere in an improper rhythm in this realm. So it's working, but it's just working in a weird way. So even in those conditions, the mind will still be there. If the person is existing, if the person is still living, the mind will be there. It's just how its relationship with this and with that.
So probably again, jumping ahead, if in any kind of psychological disorder, if those traumatic events do not want to be in that person's realm, that mind will move away and will cause these altered states to less
Right.
from that severity of whatever that memory or thought or emotion.
And in that's why we'll talk about the different qualities of the mind in a minute, and looking at the sattva, rajas, and tamas, and where even in that, in which level or which capacity it's functioning on these different types or these different qualities of the mind. Okay? And so if it is a traumatic event and if they're stepping away from that, in which direction is it heading? Is it heading in a good direction or in a bad direction? Is that going to then create another problem? So in looking at that also, they've also described what are the different methods to heal the mind. If you're in situations where there is a fluctuation and there's a disturbance in the mind, and sometimes, so this comes into the argument as, do we address the issue and talk about it like we were talking about, is therapy good or not? Sometimes it's necessary to talk it out. Sometimes it's not necessary to talk it out. Because when you're talking about it, you're giving more energy to that, as opposed to concentrating or building positive energy. So in that also they've described what is the appropriate ways to help to heal the mind. So that, like you said, you come off of antidepressants and then all of a sudden there's an event and they revert back into it. Why do they revert back into it? Is because the mind, the qualities that will help to nourish the mind and to keep the mind strong were not done. We were getting an artificial intervention to stop the mind from moving in that direction. But we never actually did anything with the mind. We never looked at the cause, the root cause for why the depression happened. The root cause wasn't the actual state of depression. The root cause was weakening of the mind. And the actual method of treating it is to strengthen the mind. So these artificial interventions, what it's doing is it's blocking the mind from moving in that direction. But the instance in when you take away that intervention, then the mind is still weak as it originally was. You haven't changed the original cause. So like I said, remember the roga bala is still there. And it just waits for a trigger factor for them to come back again. And whatever that event is, that becomes the trigger factor for them to revert back into depression. If we strengthen the mind, if we take away from the roga bala, we give the rohi bala, or we give the person the strength of the mind itself, the strength of the person, the strength of this aspect of the person, then even in those difficult situations, it will not revert back into that state of depression. So that's the difference between taking them off of that, but building positive energy and positive thoughts so that you don't get a chance. Even because the thing about life is there's always going to be trigger factors, whether it be the natural trigger factors like life and stage of life, or the season, or the time of day, or the fluctuation of doshas. That is always going to be there. There's always going to be triggers. There's always going to be difficulties and issues. But ideally, again, in our definition of health, what do we talk about? Prasannata of the Atma Indriya Mana. We want happiness and contentment of these. We also want balance of the doshas, the agni, the dhatus, the malas. We want balance. Because if we're able to achieve that, then regardless of all the other fluctuations and all the other triggers, we will still remain in that perpetual state of balance.
Along the same line as talking about the mind and the word spirituality comes up, could you give the briefest to the point of definition from an Ayurvedic perspective what we mean when we say spirituality or spiritual?
The briefest definition is spirituality is basically knowing oneself. And what the self actually is the true self. And your true self is this. The reason why is because this is the only thing that is constant. All of these can change. All of these can fluctuate. All of these, we've just described the fluctuation. This is the one thing that doesn't ever change. It looks like it's changing. And the reason why it looks like it's changing is because of its association with all of it. But this is the one thing that is true. It's true, it's unchangeable, you cannot affect it. So spirituality really means to be able to truly understand or accept this is you, not this. So when the higher and the more you go towards that, the more you have the tendency to withdraw from this and want to stay up here. Happiness and your true self all exist here. So when we sleep, you ever notice, like for instance, when you're really tired and you have one of those cat naps and you go into this deep state of sleep and you just have no idea, it felt like you slept for 8 hours and you slept for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. The reason why, what you're gaining there, those are like little tiny instances, like freak instances, where you sleep and all of this shuts off. This shuts off. Your intellect shuts off. Your primordial nature of being able to produce things, that shuts off. And you have a direct connection with your true nature. This is where that happiness and that ultimate energy exists. That's why even within those 10 minutes, you feel revived. You feel like you had 10 hours of sleep and you feel completely energized. How can you get that energy from 10 minutes of sleep, which even if you slept for 8 hours on a regular night, you may not necessarily feel the same? The reason why in our regular sleep, sometimes we're still stuck here in these processes, in the subconscious state. But when you get an access to this gives you immediate energy because this is the source of your energy. This is your true nature, not any of this. This all here is the realm of Maya. And this is your true self. That's kind of it. Yep.
So you had mentioned earlier that the mind was inert, that it exists because of this connection that you're just speaking of. And then you later said that we know that the mind exists because of the fluctuations of the mind. But I was understanding at first that you were saying like the fluctuations were actually in the prana, that the mind was inert, that it's kind of more of almost like a sex organ. As something very physical and stable. And so then when you're talking about strengthening...
It's not stable. It is somewhat physical, but it's not stable.
Okay. And so the strengthening, and also that kind of combined with like this Alzheimer's thought or meditation is that sometimes it's unintentional, that return, whether it's through sleep or just, you know, you're walking through the woods and everything's gone. You know what I mean? And it's not intentional necessarily. So there's also that and the combination of physical things that can come about that's not actually necessarily a disease process, but is a result of kind of this direct, maybe it would be better to say like the prana moving through and the shifts that's happening in the whole physical being, including the mind. I think, but I'm confused with the inert and the fluctuation.
We'll talk about that in just one second, because in the mind, depending on its functions, you can look at the different levels of the mind. And even in the levels of the mind has a physical level, it has a subconscious level, and it has access to the causal level or the spiritual level. So that's why even in that they've described the different types of things. You have the physical mind, you have the subconscious mind, and then you have the spiritual mind.
And then is that related to Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas? That the natural
tendency.
The mind actually is sattvic, which is that connected to Purusha when it's kind of completely porous or something to that, and that the Rajas and Tamas come from the connection together too.
Yes, exactly. And the Rajas and Tamas really, they're the doshas of the mind. They're the ones that can help to pollute or to cause the variations or the actual changes, that the multiple levels of changes and the multiple levels of that combination of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Just like we have all the multiple combinations of the doshas we see in Prakriti, we have the multiple combinations of even these three gunas in the mind, and why we see so many variations of personality types.
So it comes back to what you said a long time ago, that the emotions are outside what you do.
And their reactions. What you're doing is you're reacting. But if you take the stimulus out, then there's no reaction. And the actual nature of the mind itself, the true nature. So like for instance, if you're making something from scratch and you make an instrument and you haven't done anything with the instrument, brand new. So the brand new mind, its true nature is sattva. It is a sattvika nature. When it gets exposed to all this stuff and all the external stimulus and all the other objects, that's when you start to see all of these other changes.
This is so interesting. I've had reason to work with a lot of people who Western medicine would code as psychotic or having breaks. And they sometimes will say to me when I go to work, well, don't bother with that. Because they're not really here, but yet because of their race, I do go speak with them and work with them. And I have been really amazed that actually what I've been noticing is that I think these people are connected to something beyond what we see in this world. And that they get it. But their ability to sort of move between the getting it and being in this world, almost like what you just said about Alzheimer's, you know, like they've got something that's incredible and they tap in, but they just can't quite come back. And so when I see people have these comorbidities of alcoholism or drug abuse, I'm like, this makes so much sense because they can't hold that. And so they find a way to run, and sometimes they're running by thinking or by running.
And because somebody has also told them that what you're experiencing is not right. It's the same thing with autistic kids.
Yes.
You ever notice autistic kids don't work well in this realm, but they work brilliantly in this realm. Absolutely brilliantly in all the different variations and the fluctuations of the mind. And their mind has the ability to do so much more than our regular mind can do. So we term it as abnormal because it doesn't fit in our definition of normal. But what is that abnormality? What we train them to do is figure out what is the best way for them to be able to work in this realm as well. But there isn't, their issue is how to get this to do this job. But this one is doing very, very good in this job. It excels here and doesn't work very well. And that's basically what happens even in the psychological.
So, this is totally personal, but I was recently diagnosed with Asperger's. I drank heavily for 20 years because I didn't know that. And so once I found that out and found out about that, I quit drinking, but it wasn't like a normal alcoholic quit drinking. It was like, oh, I get it. I was trying to escape. I was trying to figure out how to process this information that my brain didn't work with as well as the normal, well, atypical, right? So it's yeah. Sorry.
So yes, but even in these psychological disorders, it's really what can we define as a disorder? Because it was funny that as I was writing this thing on Alzheimer's, I was like, getting too deep, you better talk. So it's kind of like that it was the first thing that struck in my mind is that, wait a minute, this doesn't seem like a disease. And then I was like, but everybody says it's a disease. But then is it a disease? Then I was thinking, okay, well, it is kind of a disease. Because there is some variation. I can't even say it's a malfunction, because it is, but it isn't. Ideally, if we look at what we want to achieve, or what should be happening, or what ideally the goal of doing these other different measures to get to the actual quality of the mind, it really isn't a pathology. But the only difference is that it's an unintentional change as opposed to an intentional change. Now, when we have our regular mind that is works very well down here and is more difficult to work up here, and it's even more difficult to go higher, then that intention becomes all the more difficult. So we need to put work into it. There are certain people who are born with this ability to naturally be able to do that, which seems odd to the rest of us who can't do that. Okay? So why is that process happening? And maybe it could be because of what happened in their previous life. Because remember, the mind does travel from one body to the next. So that's why sometimes there are children who are born with this ability that are turned autistic. And yes, maybe they're autistic because this here is a little bit difficult. And our regular things are a bit difficult. But this aspect here is extremely easy for them, but is difficult for us.
Well, aren't we as broken if we can't get by as we are?
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm wondering, as we're making these connections between, kind of pathology and mind, I'm reminded of the story of after Ramana Maharshi was realized and he was emaciated and the bugs were like crawling around him and kids were throwing stones at him. He was out of it. Yeah, of course, if you could engage him in some way, he would elucidate on, the entire universe. So he was realized, but he wasn't caring for the temporal host, if you will. So is that pathological?
No, that's intentional. It's the same thing with what we described about sleep, why yogis don't sleep. They have an increase of sattva. They're getting back to their actual true nature. And sometimes the thing about it is the actual true nature tries to pull away as much as possible from things that are not real. You notice even in this discussion, or even those of us who've been brought to Ayurveda, it becomes very difficult for us to engage in things now that we know are not real or not genuine or not helpful. Even if we want to, we revert to it, we slip and we do these things, but after we feel bad because we know that this isn't something that's good. It isn't real. It isn't the pure nature of ourselves. Because you know what's telling you inside that that's not real is your actual true self, which is real, which is truth. It's the same thing, and what happens when you get to that true state? Why is it that yogis don't need to sleep? Why is it that yogis don't need to eat? Why is it that they can exist for so many years without actually ever getting up and going to the bathroom and eating and sleeping and doing all these other things? Because their source, and they're still able to live. They don't die. How come they don't die? In a regular person, if you don't drink water for 3 days, you're going to die. If you don't eat food for anywhere 30 days or so, you're going to die. How is it that these people can live for so many years without eating, without drinking, and still live? They're living. They just look like they're not living, but they're living. And they choose when they leave the body. They don't die unintentionally. They die intentionally. And the reason they're able to do that is because they're accessing your actual source of energy. What we typically do, and this is the difference between looking at the body and doshas and looking at the mind, and why psychology and Ayurveda is a whole other aspect on its own, is because in the body, we need external prana to help us to be our source of energy. We need sleep and food and sexual activity to be our sources of energy and sources of maintenance. But there are other sources. And in this aspect, instead of moving outwards, they're moving inwards. And the inwards, this is the unlimited source of energy. Food is a limited source of energy. It gives you energy only for so much until it digests and it passes out. Sleep is a limited source of energy. You get sleep, you get a certain amount of energy, then you exhaust that, then you need to sleep again. Even sexual desire and the pacification of that desire gives you a certain amount of energy, it passes off, and it's limited. But in that situation, it is unlimited because that is the true nature of a person. So that's why they can exist without eating, without sleeping, without going to the bathroom, because obviously they're not eating, so there's nothing that needs to come out. Without doing any of these things, they're still able to exist for months and years, and they're still alive. How is that possible? If we look at what we just described about Ayurveda and looking at the body and looking at the digestive system, it seems very contradictory. Because the difference is in which aspect are we looking for our energy. If you're looking at the physical body and maintenance of the physical body, then you need the other physical things. And keeping that going and staying in this realm. If you stay in that realm, then you need that source of energy. This source of energy does not help that realm. And that source of energy doesn't always necessarily help this realm in maintenance and keeping this realm going.
So if you tell me to shut up. So in the Vedas or in Hinduism, is there something similar to like the Bodhisattva vow, which would say, if you're realized, you need to stay around and help other people become realized, therefore you would have to take care of the physical self in a different way than the yogi, sitting in the cave.
Well, it kind of. And the way they describe that is according to your karma. So the reason why, for instance, Ramana Maharishi, and even Swami Vivekananda, and Ramakrishna Paramahansa, these are just some of you, there are many, many more. The reason why they stuck around was to help. Some of them did stick. Swami Vivekananda stuck around to help. Actually, they say that he gained enlightenment when he was very young. He was probably like 19 or 21. He was very young. And he did stick around because there are certain karmas that you have to get rid of or burn. And this is also the reason why even the yogis sitting in the caves, why they stick around. If you get to a state of enlightenment, you can choose to die at that moment. Why do you want to stay here? Or why do you want to be in this existence? The reason they stay and they wait until the appropriate time is to burn off their karmas without adding more karma. So that I had this discussion once with one of my teachers, and what we described it as is that when you have the physical body, which is like a fan, right, and it's going, And the source of energy for this to go, or for this to exist, or for it to move, is sort of like your power outlet, or like your Atma. That is the unlimited source of energy, right? When you get to enlightenment, you pull the plug out, so that there is no more, you're detaching yourself from this physical body. But even when you pull the plug out, the fan still continues to rotate, right? So you have to wait until it completely stops rotating in order for you to understand that there's no more energy there, or there's no more, the Atma is not there anymore. So till that fan is moving, even with the detachment, or you're in enlightenment, you're detached. So even though you're detached, the existence of the body still remains until that karma of it keeps moving. So it keeps going. That's why they stick around. And they, yeah. So even in Swami Vivekananda, when he gave his famous speech, these activities and these karmas are going, but he's not actually present there. I'm saying Swami Vivekananda because that's the name of his body, but his true self isn't actually there in the process of being the owner of those actions. So that's why they say, another reason why they say is when you do any action, don't take ownership of that. Whatever it is, do it and let it go. Whatever comes of it, whatever fruits come from those actions, whether good or bad, let it go. Because then you don't keep that with you as things that you then need to burn off. Whether it be, even if it's good actions, then you have to get the fruits of those actions, and you have to enjoy those fruits. If it's bad reactions or bad fruits, then you have to deal with that too. So whether good or bad, whatever you do, let it go. So it does not, you don't take ownership of that. You don't say this is mine. Because even in that ability of saying mine, what is that mine? That mine is in this realm. When you get to this realm, there isn't really any mine. There isn't a mine. Because in this realm, again, there's no difference. You can only create difference or a change. This is why if you look at how these evolution started, you have the primordial nature, the ability to produce, and your ability to grow and to manifest. Then you have the buddhi, which is the true nature intelligence, that you know something. And with that knowledge of knowing, then you start to differentiate. This is me and this is not me. This is mine and this is not mine. Or you start to get these classifications, start to bifurcate. This one, and segmented them. And then from that ahankara, that's what the ego is, or the I says. Me and not me. Mine or not mine. And then from there, that's how you end up getting all of these other factors. Because once you get to me and not me, then you can start making groups. That's how you get these groups. So in the true sense, there is no me and there is no I. But there's just being. I know we've gone way into philosophy. But when you talk about the mind, that's the thing about it, is that it does bring you into that realm. And even, so there's always this discussion of whether yoga and Ayurveda are the same thing or they're sister sciences or not. In Charaka, he's even said that as well. He says that when it comes to understanding or the variations of what to do with the mind, that's when you need to use yoga. And it's in yoga, the term yoga doesn't necessarily mean only Ashtanga yoga. Yoga itself was used to describe any method that would help you to get to your true self. So that's describing all the different types of philosophy. So Charaka was basically a follower. He accepted a lot of the philosophies from Samsadarshana. So he describes that. But it's not just only Samsadarshana. Any method or any philosophy that's going to help you get to your original self. Because yoga is a practice. It is a method. And what is that method? The aim of that method? The aim of the method is to get to your true self. So whatever that method may be, whether it be maybe bhakti yoga, where you are doing yoga through devotion, whether it be karma yoga, where you're doing yoga through action, or whether it be jnana yoga, where you're doing yoga through understanding and intelligence and study, whether Jnana Yoga is also somewhat of meditation, but any one of these yogas. But these are all different methods for you to then get back to your true self. Okay, so any one of those. So even that has been described in Saturda. He's very extensive. Covers all these. Okay. Okie dokie. Yeah.
Would we kind of expect that people with a subtle mind faculty will also be predominant in subtle elements in the Sharia?
Yes. Yes.
So it would be like less likely to be a couple type who.
Not necessarily, because even in a kapha type of person, you can find a lot of sattvika qualities, and I'll describe that in a second. Because in the mind, those are the three qualities. So here, let me. Since you asked the question, I will tell you that first. What are the qualities of the mind? So the qualities are the true primordial nature, the innate quality of the mind is sattva, and rajas and tamas are the doshas of the mind. So what do we mean by sattva? How do we understand sattva? The qualities that are associated with sattva is cleanliness, shaucha, astikya, which means they believe in God, or they believe in something spiritual or something higher than themselves. Shukla Dharma Ruchi Vitihi, which means they have the inclination to follow the path of spirituality. And they have an inclination to follow the path of dharma, which means to carry out righteous activities or to do actions that will help others, actions that are beyond just of a selfish nature. So that's the qualities of sattva. So you can find those qualities in any one of the dosha prakriti. That's the reason why we don't always associate. Sometimes you can say, yes, a pitta person is more rajasika in nature. Partially. It's not always the case. You can find a pitta person who's very sattvika in nature, who's very driven to have increased the sattva quality. Similarly, you can find a kapha person who is very much of the sattva quality, even though they have the kapha nature, but they're very much into this belief in spirituality and practice and meditation. And because they're so stable, it's very easy for them actually to continue on that. In Vata also, you can find that maybe their method may be slightly different, but they also have that ability. So we can't always associate that sattva, rajas, and tamas translate exactly to these particular doshas. It's not exactly that. It may depend. And how it depends on what is the fluctuation or the state of the subtle body that is moving from one body to the next. Yeah. It makes the karma. That's the reason why there are some people who are born. I heard the story of another discussion of how to prove that there is reincarnation. There was a child born in India, and when I think they were like 5 or 6, all of a sudden in their sleep, started speaking Portuguese. And no one knew how that was possible. And not just like speaking a few words, like fluently saying something in Portuguese and no one understood. And then they found, I think they had someone from Goa who speak Portuguese there. And they translated what they were saying. And the person was talking about their house. And when they described their house, now this child is describing their house in Portuguese in somewhere halfway across the world when they were living over there. And it was somewhere like in the 18th century or something that this person was living in that house, and she was describing everything about that house and what was happening in that village and what was happening in that situation. And otherwise, how could this child possibly know a whole other language when they've never left India, never gone anywhere, and didn't have these exposure to these memories or anything like that to say it's subconsciously set in, but they're speaking. And this is just one instance, but there are many instances like this. And not just in India, you find it across the world, where there are situations where people can speak other languages, or they can understand things, or they have certain skills that you're like, how could you possibly know this? Maybe this is also the reason why certain people are born with certain skills. And like I've seen kids, like 3-year-olds who can play the tabla, like they've been playing tabla all their life and they're 3, but they can play the tabla or they can play instruments and they just do it. Like they do it unconsciously. It just goes. It just happens. Because they have even those karmas, that ability, that skill travels. So that's one indication why certain inclinations we have. And that's not, we can't say that that's associated here because our body prakriti is now this, but not necessarily, can't always represent it. Okay? So, those are the qualities of sattva. What are the qualities associated with rajas? How do we understand rajas? Rajas is bahubhashitva, which means talkative. They talk a lot. They tend to talk a lot. Sometimes it can be excessive talking, or sometimes it can be very relevant talking, but they talk a lot. Okay? Pride, mana. Mana means pride. The person tends to be proud. And to take ownership. This is mine. I did that. This is me. It's my name. It's been big. So that pride is also rajasika. Anger. Then this is the typical one that we all know. That just means anger, right? Krodha. Vanity is also associated with rajas. Vanity. And jealousy. These are all qualities of rajas. So this is how we know that a person has this rajasika tendency. Okay? And tamas is the qualities of tamas, fear, bhaya. Bhaya or fear. Ajnana, which means ignorance. Sleep. Nidra, sleep. This is a natural quality of tamas. Alasya, laziness or lassitude. And grief. It is a state of tamas. Okay? These are the qualities that are associated with tamas. So this is how we know. And you don't, sometimes you have one, sometimes you have a predominance of all 3, or sometimes you have a predominance of 2. And just like in the constitution of the body, you can have variation. Similarly, in the qualities of the mind, you can have variation. Now, and the thing about this is, in the qualities of the mind, the reason why this isn't given as manasika prakriti, because this doesn't stay stagnant. This can change. In prakriti of the body, that you can't change the prakriti of the body. But the reason why they haven't said, oh, well, you have prakriti of the body, there should be a prakriti of the mind. The reason why they haven't said that is because this can change. So even if you are rajasika, or you have rajasika qualities now, you don't necessarily have to have rajasika qualities later. You can change that, right? That's the reason why they haven't termed that a person of this prakriti is rajasika or tamasika or sattvika, because in the fluctuations of the mind or the qualities of the mind, you can change it. And this we know. This is the reason why we have so many philosophies and we have so many different types of yoga, is because you can change. You can get to the primordial nature. Okay? So in saying that, that's the reason why this isn't constant. It can change. So if, for instance, and the reason to know this also is when you have issues. So you've looked at these qualities of sattva, rajas, and tamas, right? If a person has tamasika qualities, the best way to get rid of that is to increase the rajasika qualities. If someone has rajasika qualities, the best way to pacify that or get rid of it is to increase the sattva qualities. If someone has tamasika qualities, it's very hard to be able to jump up to this. This is same thing like if someone is depressed, you don't tell them to do meditation. Have you ever tried to tell a depressed person to do meditation? Do you think they can do it? Has anybody ever done it when you have depression? And how did it work for you?
It was horrible. It was the most horrific. It was like I went back to every trauma, torture, horrible event in my life and just bawled, wanted to jump out of my skin and ran out of the room. And it was like, that was in my yoga training. We were going to meditate now, and it's like, I couldn't. It was like every horrible fear, anxiety thing that I had ever gone through was right there in that face. It was almost like, reliving every event that was horrible.
And that's why that's not the correct procedure or the appropriate procedure, I should say, because they're in this state, they're not able to handle that. But if you get them from this state to here, and then from here to there, then they can handle it. It's the same, you notice, like, for instance, if someone's depressed, they tell them to exercise. Exercise is good for depression. Why? Because exercise is a rajasic quality. It's movement. It's getting you moving. It's getting you active. It's getting you going and motivated. So in that, what it does is it deviates and gets rid of the qualities of tamas. So instead of being sleepy and drowsy and disassociated from everything and sitting in one little place, isolating yourself, you get out, you start moving. And in that movement, you create some activity, some movement, some motion, so you get rid of that inertia that's there with the thumbs. And as you get moving, once you get moving, then you can start focusing that movement because you're not in a state of, no one can understand it. Right? If you're moving, at least in the movement state, you can then start to focus that movement. And in the focusing, what you're doing is then you're getting back to that.
What about people who are already rajasic and say that they have to go running, they have to go do something competitive to make themselves feel better? Doesn't that increase the rajasic?
No, if they're already in this state, then you need to get them to the sattvic state. You need to increase the sattva quality. So those people need to then be calmed down. So in the sattvic state, you're focusing the energy, but in a calm manner. If you look at it, there isn't too much of difference in the actual activity of a tamas and a sattva. Both are sitting quietly. Both are concentrating. One is concentrating in a negative way, and one is concentrating in a positive way. So you can't tell someone sitting quietly, concentrating in a negative way, switch it to positivity. Because as Betty said, it doesn't work. You first have to get them to activity and then back to being quiet again. And what that does in this process is it then creates the ability to be able to handle that. They can't jump directly to it.
So those rajasic people that feel like they need to have the exercise are actually focusing their rajas in a way that's constructive.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Along this same vein, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions in folks I've worked with, specifically just retired people who need to busy themselves and they go into this slump and depression, and then it gets to be this smorgasbord. And I don't know if this is a cultural thing. Oh, I tried yoga, I didn't like it. I went to Pilates, it really didn't resonate for me. Then I went to Feldenkrais, no, I didn't quite get there. I didn't like the teacher there. So and they go around and around and around. And sometimes, I don't slap them. It's like, just pick something and stick with it for a while, and they have such a hard time. It's like in the grocery store, they can't pick a loaf of bread or a cracker or whatever. So, it's like,
even in that state, you find the thing. The one thing about when I deal with clients who have these various mental fluctuations is that I always ask the question, if you have a day off, what would you do? Or what would you love to do if you could do anything at all? And that basically tells you what they want to, or what would motivate them. And you find that. So everybody has something that they like. And typically what happens is because of their career or because of their family or because of whatever reason, they couldn't get to do that. Or if they do get to do, they don't get to do it enough. So you pick that one activity. Because sometimes even in that activity, that one activity, they focus. You get them to focus. And especially after being retired, where you've had such a long time of being active, it's hard to be in a situation where you're no longer being active. So they need to stay active, but they need to stay active and focused. Because what they were doing with their jobs is they were doing activity and it was focused. So you need to get them to shift in from that activity to a new activity that gives them joy and happiness and focus on that. So this is one of the reasons why I love the fact that they came out with these adult drawing books now. Because it forces you to concentrate on one thing for a very long period of time. And if you are a person who is inclined to that, it can really keep you focused and get you moving, but you're sitting quietly, you're concentrating, and you're doing a very mild activity. And what that does is that calms everything down. So it's going from a state of rajas to sort of it is a sattvika kind of activity, if you look at it. Archie.
But part of this disease or syndrome that we're talking about, and I've seen, it's like, people, it's like, but I gotta find the right thing. You know what I mean?
That is a Rajasika mind, and that is it's a very pitta quality too, is the fact that, it has to be specifically what they want. It can't be a little bit here, and it can't be a little bit there, but it has to be exactly what they want. So at that point, it's not only just the Rajasika, but it's also typically a pitta. And you tend to find that as well, because at that age, it's a transitioning from the pitta stage to the vata stage. And it usually happens earlier for women and maybe a little bit later for men, but that is the time when there's a huge change in their life. So they need to give importance to
There's
something.
no trust in the underlying process.
No, but the best thing to do is get them to do the activity that they love. I had a client who was completely overwhelmed and was so unhappy with her job. But she has 3 kids and she has, she wants to retire, but she can't because she has a responsibility. So she has to do what she absolutely doesn't love to do. So I asked her, if you could do what you love to do, what would you do? She said, I would go to the beach every single day. I said, okay, well, there you go. So maybe you can't go to the beach every single day, but what you could do is try and set aside a time every week for 1 hour or half an hour or 2 hours. That's your time. And that's the time when you are going to go to the beach and sit there on the beach by yourself and stick your foot in the sand if that's what you like and just be. And do that activity and be happy. And the reason why, whatever that activity is, the reason why each person has a difference is what it does is it calms them down and it lets them detach from here and head a little bit this way. And this is the reason why they feel happy, is because they're getting closer to their actual source of happiness. You ever notice, like, for instance, if you look at happiness itself, you ever notice, like, we think things make us happy, right? I want this computer. If I get this computer, I'm going to be happy. This is what I want. So this is going to bring me happiness. And I go out and I get this computer and I buy it and I keep it and I get it. But after I get that object, this isn't really the thing that's making me happy. What's making me happy is the fact that whatever fluctuation or desire that was there for me to get that, I fulfill that desire. So for that brief moment, it helps me stop looking this way and I get access to this. That's why I feel happy. After 1 hour or 2 hours or a day or two, this is no longer my source of happiness because it's a temporary happiness, right? So depending on our stage of life, our source of happiness changes. You notice, like, when you were kids, or you have, oh, I wanted this toy or I wanted that, and that's what makes me happy. I want this to make me happy. If you're an adult and you get to give the person that same thing, all of a sudden that's really not going to make you happy. And when you're in your older stage of life and you try to get the same thing, it won't necessarily make you happy. your source of happiness, or basic, your source of happiness is always here. It's what triggers you to detach or to sort of shift your focus from here back to here, and what leads to that state of happiness. So that's why our source of happiness, or our triggers for why we actually gain happiness or able to perceive happiness, is what helps us to calm our mind so that it can then move inwards. So the desire is movement. The desire was this. When the desire was fulfilled, then we get that. And then when you get another desire, you go back down here again. And then when you don't get the desire, then you go back here. So that's how even in our emotions, that, see the constant change we were talking about yesterday? That cyclic process? Even our bodies and our rebirth is also a cyclic process. It's all a cycle. It keeps going and going and going. And what we want to do is we want to stop this cycle process of rebirth, and try to get to the one thing that is constant, that doesn't change, is your true nature, your true self. So too much?
Good.
No, what's the time? I don't have time. Okay. We still have another. Yeah. Okay. Mike's like, oh no, I don't think so. Okay, so let's look at what are.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Sure.
Purusha, your true self, going through all these lifetimes to get back to your true self, it's almost like a cruel punishment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right?
It's hard.
Yeah. We talk about that forever, because, you know, what didn't I learn? Well, I forgot from that lifetime. It made me forget. And now you want me to, so hopefully these challenges or obstacles or happiness too, it could be something good as well, that comes up, something in my true self will remember that and know what to do, so that the next time that when I get back to my thoughts, I don't repeat that process.
Yeah. It is.
And some people get lucky and get it like that child.
Yeah. And
How do you know you're in it?
You'll be happy.
I thought it was like attraction and aversion, like if we're,
True happiness is when you're not, there's no fluctuation of mind. Stop.
Yes.
What happens to you doesn't affect you. Say I have to.
Well, the fluctuations happen, but it's okay.
And that's what I'm saying. It doesn't
Yeah.
affect you.
You're
And all of
constant.
that seems like a journey to get there. It's always there, though. It's not anywhere to get. It's just remembering it in the moment so that you feel, yeah. Or you just feel satisfied. You just go through whatever. It's not, yeah.
But I think you also recognize the expansive aspect of it, like looking at the ocean or being in the mountains, you see that there's something so much bigger than what's right here. So it allows this more contentment, or like it's not just all here. There's a bird, or there's a fish, or there's a wave, or that breathes that space.
If you look at this aspect and look at happiness and your true nature, now looking at that now is easier to understand why we really are the representation of what's happening in the larger universe. Now does it make sense why we function exactly the same way as the larger universe does? Because we think, oh, well, this is big. There's so much going on. But there's so much going on here too.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the same source of energy as the larger universe. The same source is also you. There is no difference.
Right. But there's also, and I don't know if you've heard this before, that we're in Kali Yuga time. So if you go into the Yugas, in Kali Yuga time, it is said that you can reach
enlightenment faster than you can in other,
I hope so.
Think about it, how many more years, so many more challenges, and you reach it in 100 years instead of 10,000.
So, looking at the characteristics of the mind. Saturda says that the characteristic, there are two characteristic features of the mind. One is anutva. Muteness. And two, ekatva. The two characteristic features of the mind is that it's minute, anutva, and it is oneness, ekatva. So sometimes it seems like there's multiple minds, or the mind is all over the place, and there are different types of mind, but it's just one mind. There's only one mind. So it is, again, one mind. All of us, we actually have one mind. And I think this is kind of sometimes the reason why, again, we are drawn together at certain times, and then we are apart at certain times, depending on the fluctuation of our mind. So this is the reason why we're all here. Does that make sense? Is that like... But yes, we do kind of have one mind. And I think this is, again, another reason why I feel, even when teaching, depending on your questions, what fluctuation or question arises in your mind brings out the answer through my mind. Because it's actually one mind. And it's, if you can say, it's one big mind, so the fluctuation is happening here, and the translation is happening. So you're the fluctuation and I'm the translation, but it's just one mind. So also the reason why you have interest to be here, as opposed to the not interested. So again, why are some people not necessarily interested? Because they're maybe not in the same fluctuation. Or people say frequency. Right? Because there actually is. It's the same thing as we look at one prana, one mind. Right? So similarly, there's oneness. And it's also minute. Has the ability to go in every aspect, every teeny tiny little corner. So just like Vata has that ability, minuteness, same, the mind also minuteness. Okay? That's why there are, you remember in certain cultures, in certain olden cultures, they believe that they can heal the body just through the mind. There was no need for being able, any medicine. If you've developed that skill, not to say it's not possible, but if you've developed that skill, then yes, that is a technique that you can do. Because just as we look at the importance of how Vata really does push the body for so many different ways, and why there are so many, we're going to look at how many different variations and types of Vata conditions there are. Similarly, the mind also has that minute. So if you can use the mind as the tool to heal that, then you can. It is a technique. If you know how to do that technique properly, you can. So what are the functions of the mind? And this is looking at the mind in all different levels and layers. The functions of the mind, of course, thinking, chintanam. Thinking is one of the functions. Vichara, which is consideration. You guys want me to write it down? Sometimes it's nice because when you're reading other books, these terms will come up like, oh, I heard that before. Yep. Especially those of you who read books on yoga, you're gonna definitely see these terms again. Chintanam, Vichara, Ufya, Dhyana, Odhya. So this is thinking, consideration. Sorry for my bad handwriting. The functions of the mind as the reference. Sarita Samhita, Sharita, Srinivastana, two. If you want to look it up.
Thank you.
I know some of you don't aren't familiar with where the skanas are, in which volume. So in Charaka Samhita Sharirasthana, that's where they describe the body, anatomy, physiology. In the first chapter, the second volume, so he describes. And it's funny, the first chapter, when you're talking about anatomy, physiology, he actually talks about all of this. Those 24 factors that we looked at earlier, that's what's described in the first chapter of anatomy and physiology. And because that's the evolution of the body, that's the evolution of the person. So they talk about all factors. So in that chapter, this is where he's describing all about the mind. Okay? So these are the functions of the mind. To think, thinking, consideration, being able to understand and being able to weigh different options. Hypothesis, to have a question, to process, again, information and have different questions come about. So questions are good. Questions are not bad. A good student asks many questions. A not so great student maybe won't ask you any questions. And the reason why is if you're processing the information, questions will arise. If you're not processing, that's when questions will come. So ask as many questions as you want. Okay? In that process, there is so much more knowledge that comes out. Okay? Attention, dhyaya, being able to focus on something. Okay? That's also a function of the mind. Planning and determination, being able to focus, being able to understand, being able to look at a timeline and plan and have, okay, this is what needs to be done. That's why Rajasica people tend to be very good at doing that, because there's excessive amount of that dysfunction. Okay? And yatkinchit means etc. All the other things that can be perceived by the mind in regards to its objects, which is basically the same as sensory objects. And the mind also being able to perceive and collect information through the sensory objects. Okay? It also helps, of course, to control the sensory organs, to be able to give self-restraint. That's again another function of the mind. It does that as well. Self-restraint. Hypothesis and consideration. These are certain, of these functions, these are certain types of actions that it actually carries out. Okay? Beyond this, beyond these things that have been described, comes into the realm of the intellect. So we understand the intellect and the presence of the intellect also through the mind. Where do you process information? Or where do you understand? What I'm telling you right now, is it a chemical change in your brain that you are understanding? Or are you understanding through your mind? So even the intellect, though being a separate entity or a separate function itself, the understanding or the existence of it, its ability to do its functions is also carried out through the mind. So as I was saying, the mind is an instrument. The mind is basically the instrument where the intellect is able to carry out or to do its functions. So it has its own functions as well as it becomes the instrument for the intellect also to do its function. Similarly, for the ego to do its function. Okay? Too confusing? Make sense?
The one song called that, isn't there another meaning that I'm not familiar with?
Yes, there is another meaning. Sankalpa.
Like a New Year's resolution kind of thing where you.
Intention.
Intention,
Yeah.
right.
That makes
But
sense.
yeah,
So long now.
it's
You know,
good,
the
yes,
you always said it's
Right.
positive, down, and then
right,
repeat it again
and it's an intention, yes. And in that, again, it's, an intention is a thought that you plan to carry out. So it's somewhat of the same thing. But again, yes, it does have a slightly different meaning. In all of these Sanskrit terms, there's always a different meaning in the context it's used. That's why it's really important to understand where, that's why they make us study Sanskrit. Somebody yesterday told me, it was unbelievable you had studied Sanskrit. That's the reason why we had to study it. Because we need to know when we're using these Sanskrit terms, in which context it is being used. So to understand the actual meaning of that and not misinterpret it as something else. So sankalpa used everywhere won't mean the same thing. In this context, it means that it's for planning and for determination. You create a plan and then you are determined to carry out that plan. But yes, kind of like an intention.
I just wanted to offer one other thing that I think is interesting. Talk about this oneness of mind and how the mind works. That it depends on the teacher that's in front of it. And I'm not brown nosing you, I'm really not. But I find that your method of teaching maybe calls all of us, but I can only speak for me, but really calls me. I remember Kate, when you and I were in the same KSA, our first teacher was Dr. Crawley, I think. He was in the first module, let me say that. And then we had Dr. Shibota before, and who are really brilliant, incredibly deep schools. But I feel like was the deer in the headlights, because I couldn't really, although they were saying these things, I couldn't grasp it. So I think at times when you find a teacher that really says it in a way, it's kind of natural, really is the process.
Thank you.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you. I think it's also the, like I said, the readiness. Because being able to listen to this, you know, in your first year, it's very hard to understand this. Even so, yesterday you were all explaining how it's difficult to process sometimes so much of this information. And this morning I was thinking, well, I was exactly the same way because I studied this same stuff too. And in the first time I was exposed to it, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to get this. I am never going to be a doctor. I don't know what I'm not going to pass my exam. It was full of doubt, completely full of doubt. I had no idea what I was doing, and I never thought I'd be able to understand. I still sometimes feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, truthfully speaking. but in the process of that, when I go back and I start reading it, I'm like, oh, I get that. And then it depends, again, on the intention. Like I said, I think it is oneness of mind, because when you all have the question, the answers sometimes just come. I have no idea where they came from. But they came, and I had no idea that I knew that either. And if you didn't ask the question, the answer wouldn't have come. So that's why I asked the question. Because in the process, I learn, you learn, and everybody else learns. And what the answers that are coming out is basically understanding again our true nature. Because what is it really leading us to? It is dispelling delusion or untruth and leading you to truth. So this is the reason why this process itself also is uplifting in the sense that, again, it is leading you closer to truth. Thank you. I appreciate it. And now it's time for a break. Okay, no, if we can take a break, that's fine. We can take a break.
How long? 10 minutes?
What's the time?
30?
Oh, that's a long time. 10 minutes.
We can take like 15 minutes. We can take 15 minutes. You're saying 15 minutes or maybe more?
2.
20 minutes. No, I don't have one of that.
You got it down there.
What time did you tell them we were coming back? Did you?
It's really cool. It's all on
Say
my
10 minutes?
Hey, we'll be back in 15 minutes.
Ryan, what